Well, hello and welcome back to the RevOpsCharlie YouTube channel. And today I'm really excited. We've got another edition of our Globetrotters series where we speak to revenue leaders that are running sales in different countries around the world to help you as the founder or revenue leader of a tech company to be able to understand what it takes to sell or to open up in that country. And today I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Alan Gill, who's a co-founder of Choice Energy, and we're going to be talking about Australia. So Alan, great to speak to you.
Yeah, likewise, Charlie. It's good to see you again. It's been a few years.
It has indeed. We started working together a good 20 years ago at a cloud email security company, and then you went on to great success at Salesforce, and I think Dell, before you moved over to Australia. What was it that brought that move to Australia?
Quite an easy one, really. I lived in London for 8 years, and I still have my place there. I love it. And it wasn't a hedging, like as in Australia might not work out. It was just I'd like to leave it there and start again. And that's a rainy day for potentially the kids to go and see Europe one day. But my wife, sorry, I should say, and my wife is a Kiwi. And so she suggested to me, she said, why don't we live overseas? And I said, I would live overseas only if it was Australia. At this point, I've been to 53 countries. I have a terrible wardrobe, no nice cars, but I spent all my money on travel, and Australia was the one place I could see myself living. And she said, well, if it's Australia, how about Melbourne? And that was it. Inside about maybe 20 minutes, we had decided to emigrate from London to Australia to have the kind of life that we wanted to have.
And did you move over with a job, or you moved over and secured a new job when you were over there?
Yeah, we both reached out. Jenny, by trade, is an engineering geologist, so it's quite specialist and hard to get a job. I had a background in working for Salesforce directly for 2 years and in that ecosystem. So, yeah, in 2013, that certainly now even it's not hard to find a job in CRM or in Salesforce. So I moved over with a job, thankfully.
Yeah, oh, fantastic. Well, let's kick off with just some basics of the country, just to help people that are watching to understand a little bit of the context. I was just doing a little bit of research beforehand. I think the current population of Australia is something in the order of 25 million, which puts it about 10 million less than Canada. It's about 38 million. And California, just the state of California, is 39 million. So relative to a country like the US with around 330 million in total, relatively small, but obviously a massive area. When you think about the cities, you mentioned Melbourne there, but what should we think about in terms of the cities and where business happens in Australia?
Yeah, so Australia is quite unique in that sense, in that most countries are either a country or an island or a continent, and Australia accounts itself as all three uniquely. So, in terms of bringing a tech business over to Australia, you'd have to be looking at one of the capital cities. Interestingly, probably it's nearing probably just over 1 in 3 people don't live in those capital cities. So Australia is still being built, really, 200 odd years later. Obviously, the indigenous population's been here over 40,000 years, but in terms of sort of business and tech and that kind of stuff, like for me, Brisbane is probably the biggest growth area in terms of business. Lots of people during the pandemic, which was particularly harsh in Melbourne, as you might have seen in the papers or whatever, have thought, look, Queensland offers me great weather most of the year round. And the house prices in Brisbane have shot up 50% in the last 2 and a bit years. So yeah, that's definitely the short growth area. And Choice Energy have opened an office in Brisbane just 2 or 3 months ago. And so whilst I love it in Melbourne because I'm a Pom and my
Mm.
wife is a Kiwi, we look at the rain and go, that's nice. Whereas I think most Australians prefer the sun.
And so do you see when companies are launching in Australia, they're picking one of those cities? Do you see a lot of people head towards Sydney, or is, let's say, Melbourne or Brisbane are becoming these sort of launch areas, or do you need to have bases in all of them, or more than one?
No, I think traditionally Sydney was the easiest or the safest bet. And from a tech perspective, we've seen a lot of companies move their Asia Pac headquarters from Sydney to Singapore.
Mm.
And so Sydney Sydney is as busy as London, in my opinion, just in terms of the pace of life.
Mm.
And it's where a lot of that sort of tech talent used to be. But now we are seeing that dispersed quite a lot. But you know, I would fail to think it's a bad idea to open a tech business in Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, and even Perth
Mm.
as well, because Perth is an outlier that nothing else can compete with. So for its own reasons.
Mention APAC there, and for many companies, they'll have their Americas, they'll have EMEA, and then either sort of APJ or APAC for this region. Do you get a sense of why companies are moving to Singapore as a central hub for that region?
Well, Charlie, we're both not afraid of history, and we know that the British got into Singapore for very good reasons, a traditional British Empire port, and one of the reasons for that back in the day was the access to the navy. But if you look at it geographically, it's a very easy place to get to from the rest of Asia, and it's not that far to get from America or Europe as well. So geographically, it's good, but it's also got a business climate as well. So the more
Mm.
companies that have moved there, obviously the more business there is to be done there. So if you're talking about reaching to or getting to decision makers, a lot of them now are in Singapore. Two bosses I've had in my career who I respect really greatly are both based in Singapore, and a lot of people I know that I did work with in Melbourne are in Singapore in leadership positions.
Mm. And so you might see a company that has like their APJ or APAC headquarters in Singapore, and then they'll have an Australian base being run from one of those cities. And then, so thinking about a company that's opening up in the Australian market, do you see that they would typically hire someone in locally? Do you see that they bring someone from their US headquarters or European headquarters to open up? How do you see that companies are launching in the market?
I think it's a bit of a hybrid now, Charlie. I think that you need to bring someone from your organization over here, even if it's on a secondment, and you try and entice them with the dream of why don't you live in this beautiful country for 2 years and then you can come back. That's not much of a hard sell.
Mm.
Australia tends to be, well, I think maybe with Italy would be one of the two countries I've been, or maybe France as well. So three countries that I think they don't look as to whether the grass is greener. They're just happy with their grass. They know it's good. They know
Mm.
it's good. So it is a nice place to do a secondment, whether you live in Stockholm or California or what have you. It's the people are friendly. The food is surprisingly good. Probably one shout out that
Mm.
Australia doesn't get. But you'd be mad not to do that in Canada, or at least with somebody from the local market. we've seen so many companies come to expand into Australia and fail. And that's, as I said earlier, it's a very unique country. It's unique challenges, and the, by having a local, you can tap into a network very quickly. Interesting enough, the one thing that I found, the difference between having worked and lived in London for 8 years and then moving to Melbourne, is access to decision makers is so easy in Australia. Really, really easy. Like I was working for Semantic, and I had two accounts. I was a client director. I had the two banks based in Melbourne, which is the ANZ and the NAB. And I wanted a meeting with the CISO, and I phoned his PA, and she said, "Yeah, cool. You can meet him on Tuesday for a coffee." And we didn't have a very big footprint in there either. We weren't the dominant player, so it wasn't like I was sort of taking over the reins of some juggernaut that was going. But when I met with him, then he was really good, but he said, "You're just going to have to bide your time." I thought that might be unique to you, but that's the Australian way. Is you you're welcome to talk to me. I will meet with you, but I will vet you. I will be patient, and you're just going to have to build pipeline.
Mm.
I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. I mean, it's great to know about the sort of unique sort of cultural differences in each of these countries, and the way that business gets done, and the hierarchies, and like you say, this access to decision makers. Is that something unique, do you think, to I don't know, the size of the market, or that there is a higher percentage of expats, like people are understanding of everyone else? It'd be interesting to why I think that's easier to get in touch with people.
Well, if you think about the size of the country, and you said maybe there's 25, 27 million people here. There's not very many people here, and you can't afford to be trying to keep this without being colourful. Yeah, you just can't afford to be. You just have to be genuine, and if you're not, they'll find you out, and if you are, they'll work with you, and so I guess that stems back to the culture. We have Labor Day, or had Labor Day coming up, and that's the celebration of 8 hours work, 8 hours play, 8 hours rest. With two small kids, I can't say the latter is great for me, but that's their celebration. It's the land of no worries. And so, if you meet somebody at a barbecue and they say, "I'm a senior vice president of," or they say, "I'm a lifeguard at," you talk to them in the same way. And so very sort of flat hierarchical structure, very flat social hierarchy. Yeah.
Again, when we're thinking about maybe a US or a European company selling into the market, so there's some cultural differences there. Are there any differences in terms of the way that people communicate? Do you see a bit more virtual selling rather than in person because of the distance, or is there anything that people should consider from that aspect?
Yeah, look, COVID was obviously a tough time for everyone globally. In Melbourne, one of the most lockdown cities in the world, was very tough. So Choice Energy, I guess we have two business avatars. The first one is the financial controller, or the CFO, and the second one is the blue collar, family owned and operated manufacturer. There's no way that we thought we would be able to sell to them via Zoom, and we could, because that's just the way that the world went. I think that's created some huge efficiencies in Australia, but Sydney to Melbourne is the 5th busiest flight route in the whole world. So there's clearly a lot of need to get from Sydney to Melbourne. They're easily the two biggest cities. They've both been capitals of Australia at one point, and Canberra was established to sort that out. And So I think that business is accepted online in Australia, but there is no substitute for being able to shake someone's hand and be
Mm.
in the same room with them and give them your undivided attention. And so, for me personally, anybody who's in the same city, in Melbourne, we do coffees. That's the big thing. You can come to my office, you know, you can come and see the view of Albert Park in a boardroom. People would just rather meet in a really good, it has to be a good coffee shop. They're very snobby about
Mm.
their coffee in Melbourne. Not, being a POM, I wouldn't have a clue whether it's good or bad.
Yeah.
But uh, that is the culture, and again that sort of
Yeah.
extends to that social hierarchy is we're two people and we can meet in a coffee shop and we can have some great
Mm.
caffeine and talk, and then we'll go our separate ways. And so that's the preferred method, certainly in Melbourne, and wherever you can be is in person. But yeah, we just have to do online a lot, and the internet's not what it should be in Australia. But then that's okay. They just dig some
Yeah.
more stuff out of the ground, and they'll be fine. The economy will be all right.
I think you and I both come from a sales generation where, you cannot beat being in front of someone and building that relationship, shaking hands and sharing a coffee or drink. And then you can reinforce and maintain that relationship through video or a phone. But it's very difficult to build that initial relationship if you're just looking through a screen, whichever
Yeah, look,
country you're in.
some statistics say it's 58% of communication is through body language, and so
Mm.
whilst you and I can smile and we have our eye contact and what have you on this video call, you can't see. Not that it's anything bad, but you can see what I'm doing with my hands right now. And so, just being in person, yeah, I think if you're willing to be vulnerable, if you're willing to genuinely connect with someone, you can't do it on a video call.
Mm. No, absolutely. Now, I know you mentioned your wife is a Kiwi from New Zealand, so you'll be restricted in how you can answer this. But
Most
if we're
Kiwis
setting up
are.
in
Sorry.
if we're based in Australia, can we sell into New Zealand, or do you see many people treating it as a single region?
New Zealand have a completely different psyche, buying behavior. They are very, very different. And when I lived, obviously, I'm from the UK, and when I lived in the UK, I always sort of used to think Australians and New Zealanders are pretty much the same. There's just a bit of sea that
Mm.
separates and a slightly different accent. My company was in New Zealand for 2.5 years. The only reason we pulled out was because the person that we did it with moved to London.
Mm.
We only started off in New Zealand because he said, "Hey, by the way, guys, I'm free," and he's a really
Mm.
exceptional person. And, so I did go over there a number of times, about 9 or 10 times, and um, got involved in sales cycles, and uh, their drivers and their why are just so different to Australians. So they
Mm.
couldn't be more poles apart. And so
Yeah.
yeah, what works in America doesn't necessarily work in Australia, and doesn't
Mm.
necessarily work in New Zealand. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Different countries for sure.
Well,
And
that's an
then so.
interesting point there, Charlie, because I sorry, man, I have worked with people in the past that used to, and I used to think this was a bit of an excuse. They used to say, "Yeah, but our market's different," and I believe the
Mm.
psychology of sales is universal. Our brains have
Mm.
not changed much in certainly last 100 years, and you could argue more. So I think the principles are the same, but the nuances I do accept. I really genuinely do
Mm.
accept, having seen them. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And going back to what you're saying about in person as well, that opportunity to reinforce some of those initial meetings, conversations in person can obviously be a bit easier if you're in country.
for sure.
So thinking about back to Australia and Industries. So if I'm, running a tech company and we're about to launch in Australia, are there specific industries that are sort of more prevalent in Australia, or other industries that really we should discount because they're just not really apparent?
So Australia hasn't had an official downturn in terms of its economic performance. Call it a recession if you want, in something like 27, 28 years, which is a world record. And
Mm.
look, I'm not an economist, but from what I see is every time Australia might get in a bit of trouble, they just, what does the world need? It needs some iron, it needs some coal, some lithium, some uranium, and a lot of those they are the largest exporters of that in the world. Gas is another one that I know fairly well, and so when you've only got 25, 27 million in, in a country that big, you can just keep digging and digging and digging. And so if you think about the country, organizations or companies that are making the most money, resources, mining, and energy, and even materials, a lot of aluminium, or if you're American and listening, aluminum, it does come from Australia. And so
Mm.
those organizations do require some great tech. Oddly, finance, and not so, I'm not supposed, not too oddly, but Australians are really good at finance. So the banking system here is dominated by four players, and the fifth one is really catching now. But they're very good at finance. So
Mm.
it's a very mature, established market, and that would be one to look at. Healthcare would be another. So it's I suppose around the world, but it's an aging population here. So if you think about that distributed supply of medical services across a country so big, healthcare is really, really key.
Mm.
And then we do a lot of business, oddly, with hardware and food and beverage, particularly alcohol.
Mm.
So not trying to label the Australians as alcoholics, but in England we're not afraid, in Ireland we're not afraid, Scotland we're not afraid, and in Australia
Mm.
have no fear as well. And
Yeah.
so the beverages market is quite mature. Yeah.
Mm. Mm. And yeah, well, that's very helpful. And then in terms of thinking about sort of the tech industry, if you've got a view on that, are there particular sort of big events or tech events? I remember back in the day we used to go to InfoSec in London as a big IT security event. Similar kinds of things, or sort of annual congregations in the Australian market.
Well, no one can beat the old school massive, but or even if it's, I don't know where it is now, but maybe it's at the Excel. But it's I'd say most of those would be regional. So if you look at what tech companies do, they tend to have a roadshow nowadays, where they'll go to Sydney, Singapore, Tokyo, and so they'll do a road show rather than one
Mm.
sort of event. But most of them would be in Singapore. There would be some still in Sydney. There's one I can think of. I can't remember the name of it, but that's still in Sydney. That's a
Yeah.
big one. But yeah, most of it's a bit of a roadshow approach.
Yeah. Going to see people in person. And then I guess, like, coming towards the end of our conversation, are there kind of common mistakes that you've seen companies or founders make when they've tried to enter the Australian market and got it wrong, had to relaunch a few times, or ended up leaving because it didn't work? Any kind of gotchas that you think people should try and avoid?
Yeah, the biggest one, Charlie, is trying to take what you've done there over here and expecting it to work. Australians are not um, adverse to shake-ups, challenges, and all that kind of stuff. And they generally they welcome it quite well. But you need to be really, if you're because moving to Australia is a big gamble, depending on how you're going to do it. But you would definitely want to understand the informality of business, the cultural nuances, and the you need to be patient, because your salespeople will say, "I need to build relationships," and you're sort of thinking, well, in London, people everyone buys on emotion, but you can get access to the right decision maker through a network, present a decent business case, and close a deal. Australians don't move like that. Some of them do, but they don't. In my experience, they don't move like that. So we've had multiple examples of companies that have been wildly successful, in their home market, trying to move to Australia and do things their way. Doesn't work. I'm just away from tech. I'm talking about stuff like Starbucks. Like, how can Starbucks not work somewhere? But that was the case in Australia. So yeah, also I'd probably go around the complexities of logistics as well. So if you're a tech company looking to headquarter in Melbourne or Sydney, but you're serving APJ, whoever's going to head that up for you needs to expect to be on a plane more often, or a hotel or a plane more often than not. Yeah, all the time. Yeah. So yeah, that is just engage with the right person locally, accept the business climate, because it's like they're good at business. They're really good at business here. But they do it in a very relaxed, patient way, where you have to be transparent, honest, and then people will refer you business. They'll tap you into their network. They'll help you in a way that I've never seen in London. So just as a investor or as a expander into this region, I would say get engaged with the local, be patient, appreciate their ways of business, and there's so much business to be done here. It's really good.
Thank you so much, Alan. That's been really, really helpful background. And I think certainly the lesson from all of these Globetrotter interviews has been that when you're launching in a new country, you have to almost achieve product market fit and go and find it again, because you're dealing with a different set of customers, different economics, different cultures. And almost the fact that you might be selling into the same language and same alphabet is actually a trap, because you sort of think, well, I can just use the same documentation. But as you say, it's done in a different way, and you've got to go back to the beginning and prove that out before you scale up.
Sorry, Charlie, just as a comment on that, you and I worked together, and you can imagine how I struggled with patience when I first came here. So it's a real thing. I'm traditionally or inherently not a patient man, but you have to be.
Well, thank you so much for jumping on. How do people get in touch with you or with Choice Energy if they're in Australia and looking to source business energy?
Look, drop me an email. I'm at agill@choiceenergy.com.au. If you really want to talk about energy, cool, we can do that. We've got a lot of really experienced consultants. What I'd probably be more keen to do is have a coffee and try to introduce you to my network and try and help you to be abundant first. And if you can help me in the future, that's cool. But if not, that's cool too.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Alan. I look forward to chatting to you again soon.
Cheers, Charlie. Take care.